Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I rise in support of the amended motion, the amendment that's before us on the original motion number 34. I wish to address a couple of issues. Well, number one, of course, Honourable Speakers, what we passed yesterday in the legislature is enabling legislation. Enabling legislation that sets the framework by which a regulatory environment will be implemented to allow ride-hailing in British Columbia. What government has done here, Honourable Chair, is recall the Standing Committee on Crown Corporations, a committee that I served on, Honourable Speaker, last year, to advise it on the regulatory environment that should be put in place. Now, Honourable Speaker, as amended here, there's a few other things that have been added into that regulatory environment that we felt were critical. You know, I recognize the member from Kamloops North Thompson was not in the legislature in the last 4 years, but this is the first time, in my view, that a legislative committee is being put together to actually advise on the regulatory environment that should be applied in an enabling legislation. So I'm less cynical than the member from Kamloops North Thompson on this, and as a member of the previous committee, I would say that I thought we did a lot of good work. I know the member from Surrey South was on that committee. The member from Richmond, Queensborough was on that committee. The member from North Delta was on that committee. We did not have a consensus report. There were some consensus. There were some. We had some consensus recommendations, but there were areas where there was disagreement. And in the committee, those on the committee will recall that, in fact, my views were frankly a little more similar to members of the official opposition's views than perhaps government's views. We've now got to a situation where we have a regulatory environment in place, we have a framework in place. And this amended motion is tasking the same committee to make recommendations on the actual regulations that will be in place. I'm actually quite excited by this as somebody who's been working on this file for quite some time. Now, I recognize that ride-hailing is not going to open tomorrow, but we, Honourable Speaker, have been in touch with the major ride-hailing companies, and I personally, and my colleague more recently, have been in touch on an almost daily basis with these companies. We know, Honourable Speaker, despite what you have heard here, that they needed and wanted the legislation to pass yesterday. The reason why is that this is the first time a door has been opened, Honourable Speaker. A door has been opened that they want to enter into. There were some critical things that had to be put in place for them to actually want to walk through that door. And that critical thing was what my good friend from Saanich North and the Islands did through the introduction of an amendment to the Passenger Transportation Board's framework, which could have potentially blocked ride-hailing from coming in. The passage of that amendment has enabled major ride-hailing companies to walk through that first door. Now, they've gone through the open door, the first door, and there's no doubt there's a number of other smaller doors before them, those doors being the regulatory environment. As my colleague from Saanich North and the Islands have indicated, we're concerned that we get good public policy that will bring ride-hailing as soon as possible to this province. We're ensuring, Honourable Speaker, and we believe this amendment, as this amended motion, particularly the amendment, enables the Legislative Committee to ensure that those secondary doors do indeed open. Because as amended, allowing the discussion of things like Class 5 versus Class 4 licenses, a lot of people get hung up on that. And when you actually go into the area of Class 5 versus Class 4, there's really certain things in Class 4 that I think most people would agree are appropriate for Class 5. That is the age requirements, health checks, safety of car, etc. But does it actually need to have Class 4 or Class 5? This is an issue that the committee can now look at. This was a critical issue that could have potentially blocked one of those secondary doors opening. So on that note, Honourable Speaker, I think that this is an advancement of public policy in a fine way. It's allowing a legislative committee, for the first time in my recollection, to actually be in a position to advise government on the regulatory, not the enabling framework. That was what we did with the first committee. We advised on the enabling framework. Now we're actually advising on the regulatory environment. With that, Honourable Speaker, I stand and I will take my seat as strong supporter of the amendment.